Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our third webinar, INSITE Talks. Today we're going to be talking about building surveys, and we've got with us here Nigel Taylor.
Thank you very much.
Nigel works for a company called Snag and Inspect, and my partner Jonathan Mullan.
Morning, everyone.
Jonathan Mullan is qualified as an architect, and he tends to get involved in this type of work from INSITE's side. So first of all, Nigel, can you tell us a little bit about your company and what you do?
Yeah, Snag and Inspect has been here 13 years. We're a property inspection company, so we do everything from an end user's studio apartment right the way up through a full tower, full inspections. Okay. Looking at various things. Included in that would be specialist inspections when there's problems with the property, swimming pool leaks, all of those sorts of things are all covered within that. And we have been doing this, as I say, for 13 years here in Dubai and the other Emirates.
Okay. So kicking off the questions, I know it's a bit of an open question, the first one to start off with, but what are the major defects that you see in buildings that are, say, about 15 years old in Dubai? I mean, what are the major problems? Where do you see that?
I think the biggest issue would be the quality of maintenance that have been carried out on the property over its life cycle. That then impacts everything from there on. So waterproofing is definitely an issue here in Dubai. The weather conditions, the actual exterior conditions, the extreme climate, dust, etc., has a major impact on roofing, on waterproofing systems, on all of those things, on the facade of the properties, whether it be on glass facades, whether it be on the rubber insulation that's holding the glass in. All of these things are impacted because of the weather conditions. These would be, but the list is endless, to be perfectly honest with you. There's a huge list of other options. Also, alterations to the building where people retrofit electrical sockets, things like this, have no regard to the size of the cable, the circuit load, and everything else, and just add another socket. These are the general concerns and a lot of what we see here.
So somebody added a 13-amp socket to a bathroom in the last house.
Yes,
I was in.
We see that an awful lot.
It's extremely dangerous. I think one of the things that's important here is that in UK we have a high emphasis on waterproofing because of the climate. Here, the same principle applies, but from a moisture perspective, from a humidity perspective. So we see a lot of problems with mold in the UK because of poor waterproofing. We see a lot of problems with mold here due to the same issue, but it's a different thing. It's not the rain that's causing it, it's humidity. And that's something that developers have to really take very, very carefully or consider very carefully, because the quality of that, let's call it sub-base works, i.e. your foundations, your what goes on behind the scenes. Okay, the place looks great, but what's behind the ceiling, what's behind the walls, that's, I think, where we find the horror stories when we do these surveys.
Without a doubt. It's when you actually look at, say, a bathroom waterproofing, normally they will waterproof maybe 100 mil above the actual finished floor level. They're not going all the way up in the shower, even though you've got water is going to be coming back down from ceiling level. Absolutely, so it gets behind it. They will also take the rendered wall surface, they will take that rendered surface that's on top of the blockwork all the way down to the waterproofing or even into the waterproofing. And therefore any water that actually gets into the subbase then wicks straight up the rendered subbase, rendered area outside the waterproofing area, and then it affects the opposing wall. And so you see behind wardrobes and everything else, you get mold in those locations. You see then water tracking around apartments starting from that location, because it's got the water has got out of the bathroom where you've had the initial leak.
What about DPCs? Do they use DPCs here like you do in the UK? I mean,
no. To be honest with you, and
to stop the water coming up from the ground. I guess, is it an issue? Is that why they don't use it, or is it?
The construction is slightly different here. We see a lot of things that they don't take into account the waterproofing. I've seen installations where you've got a patio door in a villa.
Yeah.
The tile that's on the inside of the property is the same tile that is on the step on the outside, and it's one continuous tile.
Yeah.
So there is no break in the waterproofing from inside to outside, and it happens a lot. And when you see that, you completely voided any waterproofing that you may have put in place, because you've got a continuous break. You've got a continuous line that water can track in.
We have a project, one villa where we have done an audit, and it has swimming pool leaks, and the swimming pool water is migrating across the terrace tiles, lifting those and migrating into the villa and discoloring the nice white marble.
Yes.
So we saw this also on another project where they had an external water feature, which was again migrating, the irrigation system was migrating through the external wall into the very nice and expensive white marble also. So it causes a yellowing, discoloration in it, and also mold, smells, etc.
And then the other thing that you've got to concern yourself with, a lot of the construction practices here where they use black sand as a subbase instead of a mixed screed. So under your tiles, instead of actually having a solid mixed screed that's maybe got an admix in it to make it waterproof or whatever, they will actually just use black sand compacted down, and then on top of that they will do a slurry mix of cement. Normally, if it's a white marble or whatever going on, they will add a white cement into that, so they're trying not to bring colour from the black sand through into the tile. So they add this white slurry mix and then just bed everything down on that. What happens is you get a crust on the black sand, but underneath you've got this unmixed material, which is a big sponge. So any moisture that then gets into it will continue to spread throughout the whole area that is covering, whether it's linked between rooms, which it normally is, and it will just spread throughout the property, and therefore massively increase the amount of mold issues, water issues, and everything else from one point forward.
I mean, we've been, I can't remember the last time it rained actually, but it's at least 8 months ago, maybe a year, I can't remember. But it seems to be in every time we get a big downpour, there's a whole host of issues about water leaking into buildings, and also drainage issues. What do you think's what's the biggest issue when we get a heavy rain?
Well, everybody would look straight to waterproofing, but it's not necessarily that. I would say water management would be the biggest issue. The size of the drainage, the number of drainage points, the direction that you're flowing the water.
The maintenance of the above.
Absolutely. Because a lot of these drainage points are put in locations where you're actually not flowing the water to that drain. It's going completely the other direction. So the drain may be there, but it's doing nothing.
Well, I've seen that, or I've seen, with no, buildings I've been involved in with zero fall,
Absolutely.
Just a flat surface, a drain in a corner, you think,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the other issue that was very topical some time back, Jonathan, is the issue with fire and in particular combustible cladding. And there was this incident where Dubai became famous worldwide on New Year's Eve with the Address Hotel. And since then, the regulations have changed for new buildings. But what about the existing buildings? What's the story there with existing buildings that around us that might still have this cladding?
You're right. The legislation changed, which certainly enforced the mandated use of non-combustible materials in all new builds, and those standards are extremely high. And I mean, the process of which a manufacturer must go through in order to have his cladding, be it ACP approved, is very stringent. So on that side, there has been a lot of positive development. On the flip side, there is no legislation in place at the minute that mandates an existing building to either retrofit or change a facade which still has potentially a combustible material. Now, a little bit like the UK, what we're seeing now is that insurance premiums, if you have a building which is cladded versus non-cladded, combustible versus non-combustible, the premiums are 3 or 4 times the amount.
Right.
So typically, I'm just giving broad brush numbers, for a building of 100 million dirhams, the insurance premium for a building which is protected might be 30,000 dirhams, and for non-protected might be 120,000 dirhams.
Yeah.
That's what the insurance companies are telling me. On the flip side, the UK has driven it a little bit further, to the point where if you own an apartment in a building like this, it becomes very difficult to sell your apartment, because the building almost becomes uninsurable.
Yeah.
And a lot of insurance companies here now are not willing to cover buildings of which they see as a risk. But I think in order for this to really move forward, and in order to, make a meaningful dent in removing these risks, they have to, the banks and the insurance companies need to start engaging third-party professionals who can really identify the fire risks of these buildings, so that we can eliminate, potential future disasters. Because with the law of averages, it is inevitable that eventually something will happen, and unfortunately somebody may lose their life over this. So it really is something that needs addressing, I feel. Legislation needs to be in place, but also insurance companies, banks, lenders, etc., all have a part to play.
I did actually hear of an initiative some time back to link your trade license to some sort of a survey, and this was UAE wide, not just Dubai, but it doesn't seem to have come into play yet.
Not at present. Although there is always talk about it, there is definitely some movement in this, but it almost feels like there needs to be a trigger or something that really will enforce it, which is unfortunate, because it would be better if it was more of a preventative mechanism.
They were also talking at one point about rating buildings and doing a star rating system on buildings, and that's slowly looking more like it's going to happen. And actually creating the inspection that would be that case, so that they can help Dubai and the Emirates, all of them, to make it clear to the rest of the world that the buildings are the same sort of standard as you'd expect to see. So it would be like a 5-star rating on the buildings, and so on down. So they were looking at doing that. That was several years ago, but I know it hasn't disappeared. I know there's
but maybe there needs to be more initiatives, like, for example, tax breaks or some kind of monetary initiative to not force but incentivize building owners to invest that capital. Now, it could be that there are cost savings to be made in terms of energy efficiency, this type of thing, but always it's a difficult discussion, and also a lot of buildings are heavily subsidized in terms of their electrical and water costs. So the same calculation that applies to a building in UK or Europe does not necessarily apply here in terms of return on investment. That's also a challenge.
So moving on, what are the biggest mistakes you feel, Nigel, when clients make when they retrospectively audit a completed building, a completed project, and they're not happy with it? What are the biggest?
I think the biggest mistake happens actually during the construction. Not biggest mistake happens then more than after, at the audit stage, and that is not getting independent people involved within that project with them. So like a client's representative who's there to look after them personally, look after that client with all the technical knowledge that they would require to ensure that both the contractor, the consultant, and everybody else are actually doing things as per their requirements. And that would be, I'd say that would be the biggest issue that we see. Having nobody specifically looking after their needs, their ends, and pulling somebody in at the end to audit the property, the mistakes you find at that point are then normally quite expensive to repair, whereas if they were picked up at the time of construction, yes, or irreversible, all of those costs could have been dealt with significantly. Not everything, but certainly the majority of the issues could have been stopped, before they even became an issue.
Right, okay. We see a lot of instances where clients engage directly with contractors. They may have had a design put together initially, but then they take one step forward and just deal direct with the contractor. And what amazes me a lot of the time is we're not talking about small amounts of money, but it can be from small to large. But very often these clients are not signing contracts, or they're signing a contract which really has no substance to it, no factual details, no measurements, no rates, no contractual terms which protect them. And for a very small, honestly, for a very small fee, they can get a third party to put this in place from the outset, or to at least review what they have and to say, are you going to be safe? Are you going to be secure? Or are you going to have a dispute later? Because inevitably, in all construction projects, there will be some areas of dispute or areas of, let's say, disagreement, of which if you have a solid contract in place, it protects you properly. So very often we're seeing that it's come to the end of the project. It's a bit of a mess. There's a dispute on the table. Payment is not being made. Work is not finished properly. And when we look at the core reason for it, it's because there's no proper contract in place.
Yeah, okay. I mean, this links into, we've had a question from Mahmoud Mawed, who said, what are the regulations used in Dubai in terms of dispute resolution raised from building defects? I mean, I don't know if there's any regulations as such, but in terms of building disputes and technical problems and the process, we've been involved in a few, haven't we?
Yeah, there's different routes that you can take. You can go to Dubai courts directly. Again, if you had a contract in place, that contract would stipulate what the dispute resolution clause should be it that by virtue of going to DIFC, going to court, that should all be pretty clear. If you don't have a contract in place, then I think your only recourse is a court. So yes, you can also try with consumer affairs, but I'm not sure they're dealing with construction disputes.
No. I mean, but in terms of what with building defects, I mean, usually you need to appoint an expert, and this is where you guys come in. If there's either the court or the arbitration panel or whatever, they need an expert to come in, and this is something that we've done on occasions, isn't it?
It's both in Abu Dhabi and in Dubai. And it's a case of the court. You may have to put your case forward to the court initially, and then the court may ask for a third-party review, or they may appoint their own third-party expert. That's pretty much down to the court, to the judge's decision. However, on the basis of that, if you have a strong case and you have a real problem of which you're confident is a default of the contractor, let's say, well then by all means you should fight that and take it forward, because if it's an issue which can later transpire to become an even bigger issue in the future, then it's really something that you have to address. If you've run out of opportunity of resolution directly with that contractor, consultant, etc.
So Nigel, I mean, can you see a shift of building owners retrofitting MEP systems, particularly HVAC, to enhance the performance and reduce cost, or perhaps to improve on? Are there any moves at the moment? Are there any building owners actually thinking about sustainability, for example, and thinking are we not there yet where there's thinking we need to actually retrofit our systems to improve the sustainability of the building?
I don't think we're there yet. Normally, the changes done to building MEP systems is based on the items failing, getting to the end of their life cycle, and then they'll look at those sorts of things. That's what we're seeing at the moment. There's a lot of movement towards saving costs in properties, energy consultants and the likes, doing surveys, changing settings for MEP systems. There's also changes on BMS systems where some of them are actually finally being made to work, or being changed to actually operate the building properly. Some buildings are enhancing those systems, but looking at the BMS before they will look at the actual individual systems within that. The big concern that we see is when energy consultants, some of the changes that are done, they do drop the cost of the building, cost directly to the building, but in the future, we're seeing issues then with humidity issues, mold issues, and various other things, because those points are not being taken into account, that you've got very old insulation, the insulation, the R values have dropped over time, and these changes that would have worked in a brand new building are not are impacting the building quite significantly, and so causing a lot of other issues that are not helping at all. And then you get a raft of other changes that are forced with these supposed reductions in cost, actually turns the other way.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of sort of touches on another point, which is, is perhaps more of a focus on cost rather than on initial cost rather than the life cycle cost, both for retrofitting and for new building. I mean,
I think even today, one of the biggest issues in new developments is it goes right from kitchens. I'm talking about kitchens and restaurants, right up to villas, right up to residential buildings, blocks, towers. One of the biggest problems is that developers are trying to be more competitive. They're cutting costs and they're cutting quality.
Yes.
And that quality is often behind the scenes. It's not the ceramic tiling, it's not the bathroom fittings and fixtures, because this is what you're seeing when you want to buy your apartment, say. You walk in and your impression is, yes, nice gleaming white kitchen, nice silver accessories, nice flooring, and all, you're happy. But what's behind the scenes is the real issue, and it's an issue from long-term performance. So you will find that your villas will have water tanks bursting after maybe 2 years in the bathroom, flooding the ceiling, collapsing, and that's all directly linked back to the quality of the product. That the developer is a contractor cutting corners, is the product, an unproven water heater from wherever, and that's really, for me, and especially from an energy perspective, the golden rule is the cheaper the product from either, let's say, a kitchen equipment or HVAC equipment, the cheaper the product, the higher the energy, the fewer stars it has, and the stars are linked to energy efficiency. So, and that becomes a problem, especially for people, let's say, who are renting out space to run a business. So they haven't fully considered how much their DWA bill is going to be every month, and this impacts on their ability to be able to, sustain the business. So it is a big issue, actually.
But it's also the other materials. It's not just the electrical items and the lights. It's like the subfloor materials, using black sand as a sub base instead of using a mixed screed. That's a significant saving, but it in the long run, it heavily impacts the building, the performance, water issues, waterproofing, and everything else, because that black sand becomes just a big sponge when you add water. So
glazing also is a key issue, in terms of maintaining that energy efficiency of the building.
Absolutely, the way the facade is put together, the seals and everything else, it heavily impacts humidity issues. the glass itself, noise transference and everything else, hearing noises, hearing your neighbour shouting out their window and you're 2 doors down is not exactly what you want to hear. Exactly, even when everything is closed. And these things, so noise pollution is greater because they're using thinner glass, less quality panels, etc.
So what would you say, Nigel? I mean, the building owner, he employs a consultant who he considers to be, a professional. He employs a contractor, again, he considers to be professional. I mean, why should he come to a company like yours as an independent company? What sort of value do you add as a?
I think it keeps everybody honest. It just makes it very clear that with somebody else because the contractor and the consultant are there, they've been employed by the owner, the client, but at the end of the day, having that third person, a technical person on the client side, purely for the client, will argue the points that will always be brought up, or argue them for the client. Whereas if you're as a client, you've only got your own knowledge, and maybe your knowledge is not as a building buildings. Your knowledge is in selling whatever product that has got you into that position, and therefore having somebody on your side purely who focuses on construction quality gives you the opportunity to ask the questions that you wouldn't have known to ask.
This role doesn't have to be a full-time role. It doesn't have to be an expensive role. So, for example, it can be an auditing role at certain points of the project. So what we call a peer review. So, for example, when the design is complete, we can offer an independent analysis of that design. We can look at, for example, let's say the kitchen equipment. We can, give advice as to, is this the most durable equipment? Because let's be honest, some people maybe will specify certain things from certain people for certain reasons. So we can look at that. We can advise in terms of energy efficiency. Should you be buying this one instead of that one? What is going to be the problem? Has it been sized correctly? All of these type of issues, and that applies to everything in the construction supply chain. So I think there's definite value can be added at design stage, and then subsequently at construction stage in terms of the workmanship quality, in terms of material quality. We even see projects when it's completely finished and we ask the client's not happy with something, let's say cladding, let's say stone, whatever, and I asked them, where's the control sample that you signed off? Well, I don't know what control, maybe we did, maybe we didn't, not too sure. But the point is, how can you then go back and argue against what you got when you didn't establish a benchmark to start with? And that applies to everything, be it painting, be it flooring, be it cladding, be it glazing, everything. So this is another mistake actually that is made very often, where there is no proper control process in place.
So, and is it fair to say that perhaps the consultant doesn't have the knowledge of maintenance and in use, because the consultant should really be able to think of these things? But I
think it's a little bit unfair to pin that on a design consultant. Yes, they should, after many, many years of experience. But very often, these type of clients are hiring small-time, new startups, freelancers, this type of, whose role they move from project to project and all they do is design. But they don't get involved in the supervision, the defects liability, and the long-term maintenance. So it's not really fair to blame that particular type of consultant for these type of issues. Yes, again, they should have knowledge, but I think really it's up to people with more experience to educate and to help the learning process.
And is this a benefit you feel in terms of an enhanced quality? for the client, or is he actually saving money by using this type of service?
Definitely both.
Yeah.
It may not look like it's saving money initially, but without a doubt, over a building's life cycle, here that could be 40, 50 years or whatever, there could be significant savings. If they're looking at, they'll be keeping that building, renting out the spaces within it, whatever. By reducing the cost of maintenance, maintaining that building, the quality of the installation will bring all of those costs down significantly. Over the life cycle is a huge saving, massive monetary gain on their part against a very small outlay initially.
What's interesting is when you buy a new car, you get a service package with it now. Which is, let's say, 100,000 kilometers or 5 years or whatever it is. And that's a kind of standard quality service that you expect when you spend 200, 300,000 dirhams on a car. You expect that to be built in. But when you're building a building of 100 million dirhams or 1 billion dirhams, that same proactive maintenance is not, and preventative maintenance is not naturally there. You get 1 year DLP, 1 year maintenance, and then after that things slip. And we even see it also where we have clients who, after 1.5 years, they have problems with humidity or whatever in their building, and you ask them, okay, but where's the maintenance records? Well, we kind of fell out with the contractor, and we didn't want to bring in a third-party maintenance, and we didn't do any maintenance, in other words, And this is when we go to buildings, we see the HVAC units covered in pigeons' nests, and it's a mess. And really, unless building owners start to employ the same type of principles as they do when they buy their car, buildings are always going to have problems.
Well, we've seen buildings where they were having issues with HVAC systems, and going up into look at the equipment, they'd actually, the maintenance company had stolen different compressors from other units to keep other ones working. So that only half of the compressors were working, and the other ones were actually missing because they were there. And the old stock was just sat on the roof next to it. So the one they'd taken, they put in this one, they got this one working because this was a more important system. So certain systems within the building were not working at all. And then they were wondering why they were having humidity issues throughout the building. So they were taking individual pieces to make the whole thing, some of it work. And then they would say that the others are on order. But when you check that process, there is no process, and there is no documentation to say it's been ordered. There is nothing in place.
Maybe one guy screamed louder than the others.
Pretty much.
Do you see, Nigel, buildings where the air quality is, a real problem from either a health perspective or a well-being perspective? Have you come across this?
They're commonly known as bad building syndrome.
Sick building syndrome.
Sick building syndrome. We are. And since COVID and the lockdown, that's becoming more of a concern for people because they're focusing more on those sorts of things now.
You're spending a lot more time in the home as previous.
Absolutely. We're getting a lot more humidity issue concerns and humidity is where it starts because humidity then becomes mold, and mold, once that starts to spread around, you then get a lot of people seeing that and noticing that, and then you get coughs and things that are not linked to COVID, and that then blossoms from there. So without a doubt, the HVA system and how it's set up is very, very key. The fresh air systems, how they're done, exhaust ports and their location to exhaust to the fresh air systems are really important as well. Then you get smell issues within the properties as well, and it all combines. So there is no question. We're seeing more of that because there is more of a concern about that because there is such a focus on health at this moment in time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you hear in terms of maintenance, people talk about predictive, preventative maintenance, reactive maintenance. You hear these terms bandied around, but I mean, what should we be doing, and what's the difference between all of these different terms?
Well, I would say predictive, without a doubt, is the best version. But for that, you've got to have a lot of information, and
Right.
so it's building that information up specifically against that building. Obviously, different buildings react in different ways. The equipment within them is significantly different. Not everybody's using the same kit, but there is a lot of information out there. So you start with predictive, which will build your preventive and maintenance schedule, and the more predictive information that you've got, the better your schedule will be for preventative. Obviously, reactive is when it breaks, so it's the last process, but not everything. You can't predict every issue, and therefore reactive will come into it, and having that process solidly in place so that you don't lose a lift for 4 days, or you don't lose.
But it's making sure that you're not basing your maintenance regime around reactive.
Absolutely, 100%.
Because this is where problems, as you mentioned, the lift is down. That could have been prevented had there been systematic. It doesn't prevent it 100%, but it certainly could have been mitigated if there is a preventative regime in place. And a lot of buildings don't have preventative maintenance regimes. They just have a little watchman guy, and it's a purely reactive thing. It's a phone call. My air conditioning is not working. The door handle is broken, and it's not. Like even major developers who control housing villa compounds, at best they do AC maintenance on a preventative basis. But everything else is purely reactive, I feel.
Yeah, nobody's focusing on drainage. Nobody's focusing on, and we were talking about rain only happening every 10 months, 12 months, whatever. Drains never get cleaned, never get cleared out, and then somebody wonders why they're blocked. When it finally rains. When you need them.
And actually, now that let's call it a bit of a drought has been long period, we could almost
you can guarantee it.
We can almost guarantee that the next major rainfall, which we will probably see in the next 3 to 4 months, I guess, could lead to a lot of problems for a lot of people, and especially those who have new properties who maybe moved into them a year ago and say who haven't had any influence of rain so far. They might need to take cognizance of that and to take some measures, I feel.
100%, without a doubt.
And do you find, Nigel, that typically in the UK, if you buy a property, you're obliged actually to get a technical survey done, but even institutions buying shopping centres and office blocks, they're employing companies to come in and survey the place. Is that something you're being asked to do by people purchasing property or selling property?
Some of the bigger developers are looking at it with reference to when they're increasing their portfolio and the likes. They are certainly looking at doing that, and we have done that. Down to end users, though, trying to get some due diligence done on the property before they take handover of a property from a developer, whether it be an apartment, a villa, or the like. But on those, only if there's a mortgage in place will the banks get involved. But a lot of these purchases are not done through that manner. So, but at the end of the day, these properties that are sold off plan, we are doing a lot of inspections of those and seeing quality issues and going through creating very large reports on even small properties, focusing on all of those the issues that the properties have to try and give to the end user what they paid for, basically, and try and reduce the amount of impact that the cost impact to them after the year period, because if it's reported then and not fixed, then it's still there in the defect liability, even if that period is over a year. That's the important. People think at the end of the year, that's the contractor has got, he doesn't have to do anything. Well, that's not the case. If that was reported before that year is up and it's a clear issue, then he still has to fix it, even if it's outside that year. And a lot of people don't focus on that and don't think about that. But it's really important. And if you do a handover and you don't take a professional and you're not into construction yourself, you could miss an awful lot, which will cost you a lot of money in the future when these issues escalate or get worse.
If you own a property and you've moved into it a year ago, you should be aware of the fact that you have a 12-month defect liability period, of which if anything breaks, if the door handle breaks, if the floor tile cracks, you have recourse to go back to the developer to ask them to fix it. But I think it would be a good idea to have an audit done of the property before the end of the 12 months, so that even things that you may not realize are going to go wrong in the next 12 or 24 or 48 months ahead, some of those things you would have the ability to be able to recognize. We can see them also, and that's something that maybe homeowners are not aware of, and it could save a lot, because even when you go to sell, you'll be responsible for fixing these things. So
in the UK, we've had in 1995 the Disabled Discrimination Act. I think it is DDA 1995, which imposes an obligation for building owners to make sure their buildings are accessible from by people of determination. Is that something that happens here as well in Dubai? Is that something you see?
Retrofitting older buildings, not something we're seeing a lot of at all. Government is a different thing. They are looking at these things. But when you're looking at standard retail properties, shops, even brand new builds, they're making simple mistakes that will cause major issues for access with wheelchairs and the likes. But there's a lot more to it than just wheelchair access. It's braille and lifts. It's
signage, wayfinding.
Absolutely, making sure that clear glass panels are not there, so somebody hard of sight doesn't walk straight into something. Actually having hatch lines on glass so that they can see the differences.
Even accessibility at reception counters, just basic, simple things. And one matter we talked about earlier, sometimes the instances happen whereby the disabled washrooms are made available as a cubicle, but the entrance door isn't wide enough, for example. So there's just silly mistakes that can happen. Can be oversights and can happen. But there is code in place, the Dubai Universal Design Guide, I think, which very comprehensively covers code compliance for people of determination, and it's very thorough. It's equal to any of the other international codes, and that is being rolled out in new builds. So that's a good thing. But we still see instances of both in terms of buildings and in terms of streetscapes where they haven't been properly considered for. And as you mentioned, it's not only wheelchairs, it's also people with strollers and buggies, because you have the same challenges, and especially the twin buggy. This is a nightmare to maneuver around streets where there's no proper ramp access. So definitely there is a move towards improving the situation. However, there definitely needs to be a push for older buildings, for retrofitting, and to improve the general landscape for everyone.
Because when you look at some of the systems that have been in place, and like the ramps that have been put in place, there's specific slope levels and things, but people will put a ramp in, but it'll be so steep, it's just bizarre. It could not be used. But
it's actually more of a danger because you can literally slip on it. And
absolutely. So definitely.
Okay, I've got to turn to some of the questions which have been coming in from the audience. I mean, first of all, Harish was asking how we talked about new buildings and we've talked about existing buildings, but actually, if you're a tenant in a building, I mean, is there any way you know how old the building is? I don't know if there is.
Well, the building management company the people who are managing the building should have all of that information, and they'd be the immediate people you have to talk to, because there is a management company, an association managers will be in the building dealing with the general running of the building, and they will have to their fingertips all of that information. So they'd be the initial people you speak to, and you can ask all of them. There's lots of questions you can ask.
Okay. And then there's another question which has come in from Jose Andres Sardinia, and he's asking about, I mean, in other jurisdictions, they have sort of incentives to retrofit buildings, be it particularly with sustainability and so on.
We touched on that earlier, that whereby, we do feel that from a government level, maybe there could be initiatives towards tax breaks or even interest-free loans, or some kind of a grant or an incentive to raise the quality of the buildings.
I think there is some incentive on solar panels at the moment, in terms of at least sort of some control over the pricing of it and designated suppliers.
I believe so, and obviously they're bringing in the Green Building Code is definitely here, but that's certainly heavily involved in new construction. And there are specific things you need to comply with that to ensure that our values are there as far as the insulation in the walls and everything else, and we do inspections on that to confirm that is the case, so that they can get these sign-offs. But in existing structures, that's not being pushed at this moment. No. And also the cost of those retrofits is the first thing that comes into everybody's mind, and how you then will increase the insulation and what you're going to do, and are you going to lose physical space within the property to do it.
But we see a lot of hotels now doing retrofits, because what they've realized is that due to so many new builds, they no longer became appealing. Their offering was good 10 years ago, but now it is substandard comparing to what you can get in the latest and greatest hotel that's built. So be that from IPTV systems, guest room management systems, the general decor, whatever. So there's a lot of retrofits going on in hotels at the moment, and I think eventually building owners, by virtue of competition, will eventually have to start looking at their buildings in the same way. If you want to rent, at the end of the day, if your building's only 40% rented out, you've got to ask the question, why is that? Is it the area? Is it the quality? How can I improve that? Subsequent, on the other hand, if your building's 100% and there's no incentive, then maybe so it's.
We've got another question which has come in from Joe Kelly, and he's asking about, if you're leasing premises and they're going to be fitted out, what would the optimum lifespan be for the kitchen and the MEP equipment and fittings? Considering you might have a short lease.
Was that 15 years?
I would look at that. I would definitely say somewhere between 10 to 15 years. I wouldn't be looking beyond that.
It depreciates fairly rapidly once you're...
It depreciates immediately.
The efficiency of the equipment, I think by 15 years, it has reached the end of its, how do you call it, operational lifespan. Now, that all depends on what we talked about earlier, maintenance. Has it been properly looked after over that period? You can buy the same car as I can buy today from the showroom. After 10 years, they can be two very different cars, right? So it's all got to do with the diligence of the property owner, the property management teams, and the end user. If you're abusing the kitchen and abusing everything and not cleaning anything, of course it will be a mess, so it just depends.
Another question which has come in actually, an incident where people are complaining about smell inside the washrooms. I mean, what is the normal cause for that you come across it constantly?
And the easiest one is the trap.
Right.
Okay, but also, if you get a smell up in the plenum space in the ceiling, because all washrooms, that's the location where your mechanical equipment is. So you're going to have your AC systems are put in there because that's a noisy space. That's a space that nobody's worrying about when there's a noise. You don't want a noise within a room, a bedroom.
But I think this question is hinged towards bathroom. When you open the bathroom door,
but in the bathroom, the thing is, because you've got that AC system in the ceiling space, if the AC system is not cleaned, if you've got the cooling coils at the back are dirty, they've got dust and everything else on them, they're then working overtime, working longer. So they then become, that dust becomes dirt and becomes sludge in the tray. If that's not been cleaned, that's not been done, then that starts to smell. You get the moldy smells from there, and that is then pushing those smells out of the bathroom into other areas as well. So what
is the actual problem with the floor traps? Because this is, I think, the
floor traps,
the most common fault.
You actually have a clean out point in the floor trap. One, you've got to keep water in the floor trap. In a building with heat and everything else, that the water in that trap will eventually evaporate if the bathroom's not being used.
Right.
So when you come home and it's in your villa and you've been away for 3 months and all the bathrooms stink, it's because the floor traps are empty. Now they're dry.
Right.
So adding water will immediately stop that. However, if that doesn't stop, then the next thing is having a look at the trap and seeing if the clean out cap that is in there is actually in. Because if the clean out cap isn't in place, then you're immediately getting smells directly from the drains coming out of that trap again.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the next thing. And then beyond that, you then start looking in the ceiling space.
Right. Okay. And this is a sort of a similar question, I suppose, from Harry Shreddy, who's asking about some old villas that don't have a return AC duct, only supply. And he's saying, does this create an issue for bad air and smells and
well, they should all have return air, because otherwise they should definitely have return air. If it's an open plenum, so open return, it should still get back to the AC unit. Otherwise,
but it might be the scenario, the example he's given. It might be, is this for split units or it's for ceiling?
I guess.
But even if it's for ceiling, there may be the scenario where the single strip has both the supply and the return.
Yes.
And that's a bad system because it's shortcutting the whole. The idea of the air conditioning is that the supply comes in at this side and goes out at that side, so that it circulates through the room and gives the user what it's supposed to be given. If it's being supplied here and returned back over there, then it's not working at all.
Not circulating throughout the room. And a lot of mistakes you see is they don't put the supply on the right side of the room. It should be on the window side of the room where the hot wall is and everything else. It should be there. So actually, and return should be on the opposite side, the cold side of the room. That's not normally the case because running the duct all the way around to that location is expensive, longer runs, ceiling issues. The client wanted the highest ceiling as possible, doesn't want bulkheads around the side, etc. So actually getting the duct there is difficult. But that's the best location. And then, but not having a return, you don't need a return duct, but you definitely need an opening for the return in the room where the supply is, in the ceiling space. But having an open plenum works fine. There's no problems with it, but you've just got to make sure that the opening for the within the ceiling, within the space where the AC is the same size as the actual duct that's coming out. Otherwise, you'll end up getting negative pressure, massive negative pressure build up within the ceiling space, which is then dragging smells from locations where you don't want them.
The other issue we see when the supply is in the wrong place, I'm sure many people have seen this, where you see water droplets on the actual grill itself. What is the reason for that?
If the supply is in a location where you've got a doorway that's always open from the outside or whatever, you've got immediate hot air coming into a location where the cold air is.
A super cold supply.
Yeah. So you immediately get condensation. You'll then see the black marks around the grill and everything else, which is causing the mold build up around the grill. And the issue with that, you'll then, because you've got those black marks, that's actually mold spores, which is then being pushed around the property, and then they appear in other locations.
Okay, we're sort of coming towards the end now, so just a sort of question to wrap things up. If you're sort of thinking the future and where things are going, and there's we're talking now we're building stuff with BIM, and they're talking about digital twins, and they're talking about doing all of that so that we have a digital model which will eventually be handed over to the maintenance guys. Is that high in the sky at this stage? Is there anything happening, or is that the future, the way things are going?
I think it's a superb idea. I think it's an excellent idea. I think the issue you've got is having people on the ground, on the maintenance teams, who can actually use it and use it to the extent that it is being designed to be used. And that knowledge has got to come downstream to get to that level before you've really been able to use everything that's being put in place. I think the only way it's going to happen is by people actually employing these systems. But right now, I don't see it being used in the correct manner. But it will only ever get used, and these people will only know about it and be able to operate these systems when they're being used. So, I think there's going to be a massive amount of education that's going to happen. Yeah. Education, training, and that changes. You then got to put the right people in place to actually operate those systems, understand how to read those systems, understand the benefits from those systems, and get people who are willing to pay for those systems in the first place to be able to put them in place.
Right. Okay.
And everything that goes.
The construction industry has always typically been slow to adopt to new technology.
Yeah.
We see that from day zero. And this is something that it should be pushed, because at the end of the day, it's evolution, it's improvement, it's really a new way of doing things, not the old way. And it's often driven to cost also. Cheapest consultant, cheapest contractor, cheapest materials, and cheapest maintenance contractor. Bottom line all the time. And not everybody has the budget or has the income to go for top of the lines products, but those who do, we would like to see that happening, because at the end of the day, look at the EV, electric vehicles transformation over the last 10 years. Buildings, that industry compared to the construction industry, in my opinion, is minute. But so there surely is a bigger opportunity for the construction industry to embrace and adopt technology. And I would really like to see that happening over the next 10 years.
Agreed.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, gentlemen. I think on that note, we've come to the end of today's session.
Good.
It's been very insightful.
Thank you.
And thank you for everybody. I'm sorry if we've missed any questions. We'll reply on the email and so on. And we bring the session to a close today. Thank you very much.